So I'd like to welcome Tabo. I'm not going to give Tabo too much of an introduction because I think everybody already knows Tabo, what he does, what his area of expertise is, etc. But I will introduce Esther. So thank you for joining us, Esther. Esther's the Diversity and Inclusion Manager for UK Coaching and helps them with with delivery of the strategic aims and action plan in relation to equality, equity, diversity and inclusion. Esther's also an ex-para athlete and the former Paralympic world champion and record holder over 400 metres. Thank you very much. And a board member for the Cerebral Palsy Sport as a trustee. I got that right. So I'll hand over to you two to wrap up the day. My biggest challenge of keeping tab over time, probably.
Great, thank you, Tori. So yeah, welcome to so typically the best wine is the oldest type of wine. So I reckon this will be the best session. Not that I'm competitive at all. But, thanks for staying on later on a Friday afternoon after what's been quite a really great, inspiring, thought-provoking and meaty conference program so far. I can talk, and that is a bit of an issue. What I wanted to do today is just share some insights of how I got here, and on that journey, I recognise that I'm a critical researcher, and I use critical social science, and it's very difficult to try and make that or simplify that to an audience of diverse ranges of knowledge and experience. But bear with me as I do this. I'm quite nervous about it, to be fair, but I'll be quite authentic with it. But I just want to just give just a moment to honour Professor Chris Cushion, who's had to head back down to Loughborough, and Hayley Fitzgerald, who were on my supervisory team for my PhD, and without them I wouldn't be here now, and I wouldn't have this type of knowledge and ability or criticality now. And then importantly, Esther and I just kind of accidentally started to meet on some Zoom meetings, and basically the whole point is about this third space where we connect academia with the lived experiences of people with disability. And I was really just inspired in one of our first meetings. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to get Esther into the conference. And I just thought, well, hang on, we've got two journeys. Why don't we share the platform and figure out how our journeys kind of connect in this kind of space that we're at. So thank you, Esther, for hopefully I'm going to give you a real good changeover and you can fly. So that's my intention. So I'm going to speak a little bit about my journey to date. Unfortunately, some of this is going to be about deconstructing my own ableist thoughts, impressions, behaviours, and I believe in doing so. From my perspective, I feel like I'm more able to value people's lived experiences. I'm not disabled, so that means I will never have their particular experiences, but by just listening, going on a journey with different groups of people over my time, I'm hoping that I'm, as best as I can, convey some of their experiences, and in doing so, maybe change practice, policy, and education. And then from there, I'm going to pass the baton on to Esther, who will talk about her own experiences from practice into policy, and then we've got like a joint call, and we just chucked it together. So it will change, I think. So when I think about a lens, we always talk about lens, researcher lens. And what interested me in Paralympic sport, disability sport and para-coaching is that disability is kind of socially constructed. It means different things to different people. And I found it really interesting particularly in the IPC, where it talks as IPC wants to challenge society's perceptions of people with disability. So you've got this elite performance kind of entity that is basically hand in glove with the IOC, and then I think it's a really great aim. So I'm not playing it down in any way, but I just find it quite interesting that you have this kind of performative narrative alongside, actually, can we use the Paralympics as a vehicle to change society's perception, to become more inclusive? And the question is, how can we do that? And basically that's been my driver for my PhD study that I undertook first at Leeds and then over at Loughborough. But before we, the PhD is about 250 pages, so I can write as well. So I'm going to distill it right down. Brett's laughing at me. I've been having to examine the last year. But in terms of deconstructing ableism, I just wanted to, again, just expand on, what does it mean? What does it actually mean when we talk about ableism? And for me, and again, Brett and his co-workers have got a great paper out right now that talks about ableism and sedentary behaviour and physical activity and the messages and the discourses within that. And so I put this up because I think it's a real easy paper, it's an accessible paper, it's available open, so you can go away and get this paper, okay? Because sometimes a lot of research papers, you need to be part of an institution to get hold of it, but this is available. And based on this and some of the other work, I know Ian Britton, you've done some great work around ableism as well. So it's a form of prejudice, it's a form of discrimination in which people, non-disabled people like myself, can appear more superior or have expert knowledge or somehow be the saviours of a group of people who have got, I don't know, maybe perceived lesser characteristics or lesser value or something like that. Ableism values particular types of bodies, and it's always compared against an able-bodied movement, an able-bodied biomechanical model of technical proficiency. In some cases, it's judged against an aesthetically pleasing body, which is in itself subjective anyway. And so ableism kind of stigmatizes, can alienate, can exclude others just because of the way their body works, functions, looks. So ableism is physical, it's social cultural, it's communicative. And when you're part of an ableist society, and that's all you know and you've been socialized into it, it's actually very, very, very difficult to recognize it in your own way you communicate, the way you behave, the way you practice. And for me, this has been one heck of a journey over the last, I think it's 7 or 8 years of this PhD process and para-coach process as well. And I am really grateful to Hayley for introducing me to the wider kind of world of disability studies. So what's about social research? What does that mean, really? And I take a lens view from a French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu, and he would suggest that the aim of research is to uncover the most profoundly buried structures of the various social worlds in which constitute the social universe, as well as the mechanisms that tend to ensure their reproduction or transformation. In other words, what's the driver of ableism? Okay, what are the mechanisms? How is it manifested in our different social spaces? And then how can we transform this way of thinking? How do we get rid of barriers, etc.? And whilst that was the aim, and for me, it just made so much sense. I was like, right, that's why I'm doing research. But then I had to recognize that when Denison and Lincoln would suggest that when I develop a research process, it's shaped by who I am, my own lens of view. Okay, now that's going to be shaped by my ableist lens view. It's not going to come from a disability perspective, because ultimately I am who I am. And so to kind of break my ableist thinking and open up my view to a whole world that I've never been part of, we need what we call sociological imagination and reflexivity. And I like these cartoons. They're so good. So, sociological imagination. So, Colin Barnes would suggest that if we want to understand disability, then we need to have this sociological imagination. And I was like, okay, how do I communicate what sociological imagination looks like? And so I love this cartoon from an American cartoonist, and it says, "Sometimes I think the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is that none of it has tried to contact us as yet." So there's like a sense of, I'm in my world, and I have a view of my world, and I make assumptions about the view of my world based on my experience. Okay, so there's life out there, okay, and I'm absolutely convinced there's life out there because it hasn't contacted us. It's like a bit of a juxtaposition, really. And then we've got reflexivity. And I know within our school we do lots of work around reflective practice. In fact, my wife, who's a lecturer at Edge Hill, her whole PhD is in reflective practice. And I get people use the word reflection all the time, but it's kind of like, what do you mean by reflection? And so Bourdieu would suggest that we need to move towards reflexivity. If we're going to have a sociological imagination and deconstruct the way we've been socialized, then reflexivity is a way to help us go about that. And again, I love this cartoon character. Yesterday I discovered that I'm a cartoon character. I was up all night trying to work out whether I'm the lines or am I the person within the lines. I thought it was quite good. it made my head hurt, and let's not go into a philosophical discussion about who we are or not. But the point is, it's about turning, not being afraid to turn kind of the sociological tools, critical tools on ourselves to ask deep questions about who we are, how we view the world, and how we view others. And in reality, in terms of my background and journey here, I've come with a very ableist habitus. Okay, so Bourdieu talks about habitus, and this is my mum back in Zambia, and she was the most competitive mum ever. We used to do races on the beach, and she would want to beat all the kids, all our siblings. She was always wanting to win. So that's kind of the background that we grew up early on. No surprising, I became an athlete, and in this case, I'm winning this 400-meter relay, but at the end of it, I'm being sick. So I'm quite good at pushing myself. I'm quite competitive. Okay, and then I could become a coach within goalball, and then athletics. So everything I do, and I'm here talking about sport. Okay, so sport is just part of my identity. It's one part of it, but it's quite a significant part of my identity. Although in some cases I've sometimes thought, why the heck am I still talking about sport all the time? So I have this ableist sporting habitus, which means my understanding of ability is based on how fast can I run. Or do I make the school first team? Or do I make the county team? Or do I get deselected? Okay, that is basically how I understand winning or success or ability. We won the European Champions in 2009 with goalball. Pat on the back, fantastic. Lots of good funding from UK Sport. The following year, with the same team, we I think became something like 9th in the World Championships. We lost half our funding. So it's a competitive world, it's a brutal world, and it really challenges kind of who I am and how I am and what I think. And as I started to get into the meat of my PhD, which I interviewed international coaches and athletes around the globe about what does it mean to be coaching in Paralympic sport? What does that really, really mean? And we talk about context a lot, so coaching is very contextual. But often the context that often is portrayed in the research is very much a space. So I would be coaching you guys in this particular space. Okay? So context is very like a watered down, it's just an area where people coach. So when I started to kind of deconstruct understandings around context, Bourdieu helped me to think about fields, social fields. And what he suggested was if we start to map what the influence in fields that connect, we can start to figure out, okay, where meaning comes from. So what do we think about disability? What do we think about coaching? And this was a really huge eye-opener for someone who is very much immersed within high-performance sport. And he would suggest that social fields are driven by economic capital and cultural capital. Economic capital is about money, clearly. Cultural capital would be, in high-performance sport, would be a medal. Okay, so it's a very commodity-orientated environment. Okay, if you win gold, you get more money. If you win more goals, you get more money. If you don't do that, you don't get any more money. So it's a marketplace. And that, unfortunately, kind of started to tug at my kind of altruistic approach to coaching, which I thought, you know, I'm actually doing a good job, I quite like this. But it was part of this sport in habitus where it was all about winning. And literally, as I start to map this and interview athletes, what I started to find was this was a very common thing across coaches and athletes. And what we had in terms of social fields, once you have economic capital as a driver versus cultural capital, you start to have a hierarchy. Okay, and that hierarchy for me, and also for the participants that I interviewed, was the Olympics at the pinnacle, then you have Paralympic sport, and then you've got disability sport. Okay? And so what you had was coaches and athletes, in some cases, we're all Paralympics. Or the Paralympics is greater than the Olympics. Or actually the Olympics is elite, we're not quite elite. So irrespective, the Olympics, or the Olympic field, the IOC, was the barometer in order to judge how elite people were. And then at the other side, it was like, well, I don't want to be disabled, or I don't coach people with disability. In fact, we weed out people with disability. So you have this real tension within this social space. And then you've got para-coaching, which is kind of this small little kind of field, which, when you start to think about context, is influenced by this social, cultural kind of narrative, this power struggle for what really constitutes, is a disabled body elite or not? Should it be accepted in this kind of performance field or not? And then when you start to ask athletes about impairment groups, then you have a hierarchy of impairments. Okay, so what we started to see was in assimilation of disability into high performance. Disability wasn't challenging our logic, it was about the high performance logic driving how we understood disability. And so, I'm conscious of time, so my first narrative was around, I can't see you as being disabled, you're elite athletes, that's how I'm going to treat you. Now I said that to a group of goalball players with a PowerPoint presentation behind me. Yeah, that was my first experience in goalball, but that was part of kind of me carrying this ableist view. So what I was trying to do was remove disability. I felt that it held less capital, less status. I tried to draw with my habitus, I tried to draw closer relationship with the elite performance end, the able-bodied end, which had like real good symbolic capital. It means the highest view of capital. I was trying to make sense of disability through the lens of Paralympic sport, which is elitist, but then you've got this developmental end, but I'm quite elitist, so I like this space, I don't like this challenge in people's perceptions, but it's part of the reflexive journey. And I felt like initially I was kind of in that kind of disability, para sport space, and I was like a duck in water. I had an elitist view, I was an elite performance environment, trying to instill elite performance values, and that's what I was aiming to do. This was my initiation into para sport. But the reality of impairment started to make me think, oh, there's a little bit more to this. And in this case, when we started to ask questions of coaches, they talked about, well, I don't coach the disability. Okay, that's a fair point, I accept that. But when we travel to hot countries, we need to be aware that in some cases, athletes with spinal cord injury could actually die if you put them in heat. Okay? And Tanny and Greg alluded to that last time. So what was happening here is that our habitus, which is structured by elite performance, was actually restructuring that elite environment just through our practice. We don't even really think about it. This is not a critical kind of conversation. This is just the way things are. You know, we need to protect people with disability from the heat, acclimatization, etc. It's just part of practice. But when you put, I don't coach disability, but then say, actually, impairment is valuable, so somewhere along in that logic, disability is over here, impairment's over there. It's a very medicalized approach. And I'm conscious here that as you read this, there is some explicit language that I personally would not use. Okay, and I'm not suggesting that I'm going to say that now. But this was an example when I was with para-athletes in Malmo, and this started to get me to think about, actually, the body is socially constructed. It has different values in different places. And in this case, for me, our black body, okay, so being mixed race, my whole family comes from a history of activism back in the 60s, when the Caribbean nations were invited to be part of the UK scene and then were ostracized. So my family comes from a long history of activism. And so I've never really experienced the blatant racism than in this case. But what challenged me was the fact that these were blind athletes. So I'm like, so you don't see that they're blind, but you see them as being black. Wow. And so when Ian, you talked about intersectionality, that just opened my mind to thinking, oh my gosh, I need to think like even more critically all about this. And the reality, as Schilling and Bourdieu would suggest, is the body is a marker of symbolic value. It has values in different places and in different ways. The body is socially constructed against an ableist society, which is predominantly also very much based on a very Anglo-Saxon view of normality. Then I had to consider, am I a parasite researcher? And I think Brett alluded to this in co-production eloquently this morning. Why am I doing my research? Okay, and Hunt, one of the early protagonists of the social model, will suggest that sometimes people who are non-disabled will do research on disabled people for their own value. Okay, and I had to really wrestle with this because this is kind of language that I didn't know about in my initial research proposal. It's kind of like an evolution or moments of enlightenment, which I'm thinking, oh, not another thing I've got to think about. Hence why my PhD is probably quite long. Sorry, Brad. And sorry, Haley. She's read so many iterations. But in a way, I kind of get comfort that I'm hopefully, that as I consider, am I a parasite, I'm hoping that I'm trying to do with what tools I have, that I'm trying to make some form of impact for the lives of people with disability, whether it's para-coach, work with the Special Olympics, some work with coach education in Singapore, para-hockey, ICC. I'm also been invited to the UK Learning and Disability Group, which informs organisations such as SIMSPA, which I now share with Esther. So we're trying to make a difference. But the reality is, in making a difference, I benefit from that. I get credibility. I get a PhD out of it. I get funding out of it. People think, oh yeah, Tabo, you're so great. And I'm like, no, really? Or you're an expert, which I cannot stand that word. I'm like, no, I'm just learning. I'm trying to do a good job for the people that I believe are the most ostracized in society. So for me, it's about capturing the lived experience of disabled people, connecting that third space with theory, and this is an ongoing process of reflexivity. And so that's my ableist habitus. It's kind of been deconstructed, but I'd love to hear from Esther more about her experiences as well.
Thank you. Good change, Taro, I can say, in terms of a button. Thank you, and thank you for having me here today, and I appreciate we are on the running now to the end of it. In terms of where our paths crossed, I am Esther Jones, and I work for UK Coaching. I'm also, I believe the term is former Paralympic athlete, can't be an ex-Paralympian, I understand, so former Paralympian. I was just given the opportunity to share my journey into sport and kind of where I got to. But I think some 30 years ago, since I probably started my journey, and it's probably a little bit longer than that, I think now what I have is the ability to stand back and look at what I've got as a result of being an athlete and kind of where I've gone and what I've done as part of that as well. So yeah, I wanted to chat about that a little bit as well. So, and I asked Tabo, am I talking to you as Esther, former Paralympian, or am I talking to you as Esther UK Coaching? And I can't really separate the two. I am Esther, so I'm all of these things. And so I'm conscious that I'm all of these things, you know, when I'm talking to you. So yeah, I was born with cerebral palsy very prematurely. I was born at 28 weeks in the 70s. And so right from the very beginning, you know, the doctor's, you know, thing to my mum was, well, I'm very sorry, you know, she'll never go anywhere, she'll never walk, she'll never talk, you know, I'm very sorry, but there you go. And so she said, thank you very much, took me home. Now, luckily, my mum was a physiotherapist and had actually spent her time working in sport, in dealing with youngsters with physical impairments at all levels. And she'd also worked with Sir Ludwig Goodman back in the day as a trainee physio, so that, just hold on to that thought, because that will come back to me. But I think Tanny talked about opportunity yesterday, and that was probably one of my first opportunities, or one of, you know, when we talk about that sliding doors moment. That was my sliding doors moment, that I'm very conscious of how lucky I was, the mum that I had, and the attitude that she had in terms of me and my disability, and the fact that she was a trained physio. I thought that was really unfair, actually, because that's a real busman's holiday. But actually, she was able to go home and do all the things that she needed to do, and obviously I'm here now. And so, not only her medical background, but also, you know, her aspirations for me as a mother are vitally important. And I know that now as a mum. You know, the aspirations that you can have for your kids is probably one of the most precious things that you can instill in them, isn't it? And I was just so lucky that my mum happened to be of that field, and you know, it wasn't a disaster for her. So there we go. So yeah, went to mainstream school. But before then, I always loved sport and physical activity and doing stuff. So grew up in a little village, horse riding, playing cricket, tennis off the side of the barnyard wall. And yes, I dreamed of being in the Olympics and being a gymnast for some reason. Probably because that was the fact that I could drag the mattress off the bed and put it on the floor and, you know, whatever. So yes, I absolutely dreamed of being a Paralympian. An Olympian. But obviously that for me was completely out of my reach. I didn't know anything about the Paralympics. I didn't see anything about Paralympic sport at all. There wasn't Tanni Grey-Thompson that we know Tanni Grey-Thompson now, because this was in the kind of early 80s. So my role model was Daley Thompson. I thought Daley Thompson was amazing, and Daley Thompson was just absolutely the bee's knees, because he was so competitive, he was so driven for what he wanted to do. And I guess I was really driven as well. So I went to a mainstream school, and the school itself, interestingly, I have quite a minimal impairment, but not in a school where you're the only person with an impairment. And so it was really obvious that I stood out as the only person with an impairment. But the school absolutely didn't want to treat me any differently whatsoever. Even to the point where, I would hold a pen with two hands to learn to write, because I didn't have the coordination or the strength to hold a pen in one hand. And actually my mum got into a load of arguments, but she needs to hold a pen with two hands, because she can't do it with one. But that's not how we do it. You've got to do it with one. So there was some of that going on, which was interesting. A lot of that I didn't know about. It was in the background, not till later. But yeah, in terms of sport and physical activity, I loved it, but it was also where I was at my most vulnerable as a disabled person. My impairment became more obvious, the more coordination, balance, catch things, throw, run, all that kind of stuff. So I actually really grew out of love with sport and physical activity, and I didn't want to do anything in front of anybody else. And that's where, again, going back to my mum, a fantastic organisation called CP Sport, and she was involved with CP Sport a long time ago before I was born, and the Paralympic movement. And she actually introduced me to CP Sport as a youngster, and the reason for that was twofold: to give me back some confidence, and to help me to meet other disabled people. Which is probably quite weird to say, but it was quite isolating to be the only disabled person in a mainstream school. Because the only other disabled people I saw at that time were the Spastic Society images of people, or disabled people getting really angry, chaining themselves to railings because they couldn't get on a bus. I'm talking about the 80s, because they couldn't get on a bus. Do you know what I mean? So it was either really angry, really, really angry, or really needy, and that was the way that the Spastic Society portrayed things. So, CP Sport for me was a life-saving organisation, and really, gave me the opportunity to meet other people with a disability with CP, which was important for me at that time. And it also introduced me to competitive sport in a level where I could take part. So that was really important. Moving on, quite quickly was identified as somebody with talent, and one of the reasons for that was I was quite sporty and got quite involved with stuff, and quite quickly got recognised and put onto performance pathways then back in the day. Not sure if they were such a thing, but identified and put into the system anyway. And my first international competition was in Barcelona in '91. And that was the pre-Paralympic warm-up event, where they basically took me out there at 14 to kind of go, can this young girl cope with such the pressure of competing in a stadium, etc. And the answer was yes. And I went back a year later in Barcelona in '92, and that was my medal haul, which was completely unexpected. And I am just going to say that behind Tanni Grey-Thompson, I think I was the most successful athlete on the track, but I was behind Tanni. So, and what an amazing role model Tanni was, for somebody like me, and it was great to see, what that did for Tanni, and obviously the Tanni that we know now. But Barcelona was a great games, and one of the reasons it was a great games, I think, was a real turning point in terms of the first time people came to watch the Paralympics, and I ran in front of 165,000 people, which was amazing. And then went on to the World Championships in Berlin in '94, and again the same result. So not obviously Paralympic gold, but world record goals, etc. So I was doing pretty well on an athletics front. From a career point of view, not so well. So that was around the time where I was looking at, what career options I was going to take, where I wanted to go in kind of career. So I really wanted to go into the armed forces. And I remember, I'm laughing about that now because I probably wouldn't have made it in the armed forces for lots of reasons, but I had my heart set on going into the armed forces. And I remember going to a careers evening and, I want to go into the armed forces. And the guy was, really, I'm really sorry, that's not for somebody like you. And that kind of, and he wasn't being funny about it, or he didn't think he was, do you know what I mean? He was deadly serious. It wasn't an option for somebody like me. And I think that kind of really threw me into a bit of a, not quite sure where I am here or what I can do or all that, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, competing, succeeding in sport became everything because it felt like it was the only thing that I had, do you know what I mean, to be successful and then to carry on, obviously, to go into the, to go into, the Paralympic Games in Atlanta, and to have that pressure, and I understood what pressure is. By the way, when you go into the next Paralympic Games and you're already World and Paralympic champion, that's a different ball game. That's another set of pressure. But so achieving in athletics became really, really important to me. And so then obviously we came up. I didn't compete well in Atlanta. I'm going to leave it there. and then obviously the World Championships in 1998, and so managed to pull myself back up and get up to that level. What was really interesting around that time is that was, if I remember rightly, the time that the World Class Performance Programme came in for disabled athletics and disability athletics. And so that was a really exciting time for me because as a mainstream, as an ambulance sprinter, the one thing that I needed was more connection with the governing body and the sport. And previous to that, disability athletics and athletics was very separate and weren't particularly included. I was turned away from my first athletics club because somebody felt they couldn't work with me. Not having to do athletics, by the way. This is what it was. And so for me, it was really exciting as an ambulance sprinter. I needed the knowledge of athletics, of sprinting. And that merger over the years opened up a lot more opportunities in terms of access to coaching, access to really understanding the sport of athletics, and also some of the other services that came in. Now, I'm making a distinction here that I needed that, because I needed that as an ambulance sprinter. Okay? What the other, athletics is made up of lots of other disciplines, and so there is a sharing of knowledge about what we know about disability sport and things and also where the mainstream sport really needs to come in and support, and it's a sharing of knowledge. I think it's not a one size fits all, and it will be dependent on your event and what you do and the background of it. But for me, it was vital that athletics came in, and that was fantastic. And for the first time, I really felt part of athletics. And for all the things that I did, one of my greatest achievements was running for Mansfield Harriers Athletics Club in the county champs. That was the same time that I also got the Paralympic qualifying standard for Sydney, and I also got some points on the board for my club, and that was important to me as an athlete. So yeah, Paralympic Games in Sydney, that was my last games. Unfortunately, I didn't medal. I am going to hold on to what Paul said yesterday about let's congratulate those that got a PB and came fourth, because that was me. And I look back now and I think, yeah, that was an amazing achievement. I didn't want to finish, fourth is the worst place to finish, and not coming away with a medal. Gutted for lots of reasons. But then really, got my, what kind of transpired from there is that I knew that I wasn't going to make a career out of being a Paralympic athlete. Not as a world medalist or a world championships or being a repeater or all the things that I've done. I'm not going to make a career out of that. And so I was always really mindful of that. And again, I go back to the importance of CP sport in terms of me as an athlete, me as a person, and my own well-being and the opportunities that they provided me. They also provided me with some work placement opportunities, and I did some work placement opportunities. And then from there, you know, I was invited to get back in and get involved in a programme around supporting athletes to transition into coaching roles. And so I was very lucky to work with Keith Antoine, Ken Kelly at the time, the team that were in place that wanted to support me, to help me to develop into an athletics coach. And I went back and worked with the team on several occasions in World Championships. And I was actually out in Athens as well as part of the coaching staff, and that was fantastic. I worked with Activity Alliance, or EFDS, back in the day, and again, you know, I was able to, I had a job there, went on and did some work, met some great people and some great, you know, mentors. So, you know, shout out to Ray Ashley, who's still at Activity Alliance, who really worked for me and supported me in my goal from transitioning from an athlete and just being Esther the athlete into Esther, you know, moving into sports development and something else. So shout out to Emma Atkins, who supported me also as well, and then I moved into work for UK Coaching, and I've been at UK Coaching for the last 17 years, and that's been fantastic, really because, you know, I understand the importance that a coach can play in your life, not only what they do in the track, but also the fact that when I was going through those difficult times in terms of what do I do as an athlete, you know, what can I do in my life, my coaches were there. They guided me in terms of career advice. You know, I was really able to work with them, picked the courses that I was going to do at college because on the back of conversations that I had with my coaches, not anybody in education. So, you know, I really value, you know, the great work that coaches can do on and off the field of play. And then I'm now also just recently, week 2 in secondment with Sport England, which is great to go back and to work in the disability team and to work with them to really push forward the vision around uniting the movement and tackling inequalities and ensuring that, you know, the people that most need it can access sport and physical activity, and we know what the benefits are. So that's me, and that's my life. One thing I did just want to highlight, and I know I mentioned it in terms of you know, the work of UK Coaching and what we do, and I feel really privileged to work for an organisation that I know, you know, really champions and supports coaches, and we understand the importance of a role that the coach can play, and absolutely we're here for all coaches. And so there's 2 things that we really want to do in this area, and the first thing is that, you know, we really champion and understand the fact that we need to have a person-centred approach to coaching, and we really advocate and support that. But we also want to work to support coaches to be more confident to work with disabled people. And through our UK Coaching survey, Coaching in the UK, that's been done twice now, 2017, 2019, it's the biggest coaching survey in the UK. You know, we know that coaches are still feel less confident about working with disabled people and people with long-term health conditions. And so we really need to do more to support coaches to feel more confident to work with disabled people. Everybody, you know, for me, you know, if you're a good coach, then that's the fundamental thing, you know. And so out of that has come a project where we're working with Sport England to look at, you know, putting together a programme, an initiative, a curriculum around supporting coaches to work with people with long-term health conditions. And we've worked with a number of partners on that. We talked about the collaboration this morning, and been lucky enough to work with Sport for Confidence and really talk to end users, a whole range of end users, about what they need from coaching, what do they need from coaching, and then how can we build a curriculum around that to support that. And Sport for Confidence have been great in that. We've also worked with Activity Alliance to help them to ensure that the programme, the Inclusive Activity Programme, can keep running through COVID. So again, we've worked with them to put that online or on a virtual classroom so that people can keep learning. We've worked with some NDSOs as well to pull together some training. So British Blind Sport, I don't know if you're still here, we worked with them to pull together an e-learning module about how to work with people with visual impairments. And we have a whole range of information on our website. which is the UK Coaching Club, which you can find on the UK Coaching website, a whole range of information about working with people with impairments. We also collaborate, and collaboration for us is key around, so we also sit as part of the UK whole country disability group, where we work collectively to make changes in the sector. And one of the things that we've done, or that group has done, I should say, is to work with DisSPA to pull together the standards that you see up there, so the population-specific standards around working with disabled people, and that go alongside the DisSPA standards. The long-term aspiration of that group is that those standards move into your general core coaching standards. And so the work that we've been doing with TABO is to look at how we connect the work of the Paracoach framework and how we work together moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just going to kind of thank on behalf of everyone, both of you, for your vulnerability in that session. I think sharing personal experiences is always an interesting one. And Tabo for giving us all a headache about our own biases and how to deconstruct them. Nice one to go into the weekend on. In terms of questions, would you like to take one question, and then anyone who wants to stay afterwards can stay, but it just gives you the opportunity to wrap up and people can leave if they want to or have to for travel or training. Has anyone got a burning question?
I'd like to take it now. I'll ask one.
I know it's always me, sorry. I was wondering, based on your talk about ableism earlier, if both of you, or either of you, still feel there's internalised ableism in the kind of structure of parasport and disability coaching, and how you feel that that might be impacting the sporting landscape.
I don't mind.
No, go on.
The answer is yes, because I think it's implicit. Because we're in an able. Once you recognise that, culture sits across different fields like a net, and when you're socialised in that culture, it's very difficult to see outside of that. And so, part of the Paracoach project as a solution was to create the coaching framework and the e-learning course as a freely available tools or reflexive tools, which coach education, coach developers, coaches can maybe register and go through, and hopefully it will prompt kind of them to question the unquestioned. Because again, when we look at a lot of the research within paracoaching, there's a lot of medicalised discourses in which are still quite prevalent. And like I said earlier on in the presentation, it's very, very difficult for you to recognise that kind of language and practice without some form of criticality. And I would say that I still have very much an ableist kind of habitus, and I think when you were talking about co-production this morning, Brett, I was thinking I've got a long way to go in terms of learning and breaking down my own habitus. So.
Yeah, my point, I guess, might be slightly different to that. I think one of the things I think is really important when you look at this is I think there is quite a lot of information out there, training, learning, resources, to support people. I think one of my personal things is, how people sometimes think I make a conscious decision that I'm going to work with disabled people. And in reality, it doesn't work like that, in my experience, because you don't know who you're going to get coming through the door or rolling through the door or whatever. So I think, you might make a conscious decision that I'm going to work with somebody at this level, and then that might become that actually I'm going to work with this group, and that they become a group of disabled athletes for whatever reason. But one of the things that I'm really keen to really try and unpick is, how do we get all the resources, the models, the good practice. Again, we talked about the STEP model before. You know, it's almost like it's one of the best kept secrets. Or, you know, or if you're not working in this field, how do you know about it? And it's like, you know, how do we get to coaches, generally coaches and everybody that, you know, haven't made that decision that I only work with disabled people. You know, we want to get to everybody because you never know who you're going to work with. And in my personal experience, you know, and Tanya mentioned it yesterday, you know, being turned away from something, you're not going to get another chance. Do you know what I mean? And that is so important that, you know, if somebody walks through the door, whoever they are, for whatever reason, that we're able to welcome them, that we're able to this is the place for you. Even if it isn't, because actually you end up that their motivations and their aspirations mean that this club isn't for you. Whatever, you know, whether you're disabled or not, you know, this might not be the place for you. But welcome in, because you're the first connection with a sport. And so that, for me, is just massively important. I don't know whether that answers your question.
It's nice. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is an answer to the question, but it's a good one to continue thinking about. Like, I think it, like, you know, you're keen to unpick and prevent discrimination. So I guess that does answer that there is still ableism and that kind of unfair reaction at times. But it's something that we're working on to change, which is important.
And a confidence thing, is it still a confidence thing? I hear all the time. I don't feel confident to work with people. I don't, you know, to me, and it's like, we need to address that.
Yeah, we get a lot of the time the excuses on the insurance landscape, which, you know, is another question and challenge, I guess. But yeah, you're right. I think there is a lot of confidence issues.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is to not scare people off and make it that complex that they can't do it. So it's trying to have a language and a communication that takes someone on a journey. You know, let's get more coaches in, and then take them on a journey of flexibility. And that doesn't happen overnight. So it's actually, you know, creating the more we talk about it, the better. You know, and if we don't do that, then nothing will change. So if we talk about it, that's one thing. But recognise that people are on a journey, and if we value diversity, we value difference, then we're on the right track. It's when it's hidden that's where the danger lies from.
Thanks, Pablo. You've got 4 minutes to close and reflect, I believe is what the schedule says.
Who wrote the schedule?
Not me.
So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how you do this, but just basically thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for taking time out over the last couple of days just to be here face to face for a start, but also to be open to discuss, to challenge, to connect, to collaborate, and hopefully advocate for a more inclusive and empowering kind of sporting experience. It's a start of a journey. It's a learning journey, and I think the most important thing is that we keep the communication open. And if we do that, and dialogue is always the best place to be. As soon as we if we go into silos or return back to silos, then we won't get anything done, because we need a critical mass of people together on this journey. So I just want to thank you guys for coming along. Thank you for the speakers and our guests, international guests, some of them who've had to go off and catch flights already. And the John Moore's team, the cracking team behind the scenes who've been supporting us since probably May, February time, where we started to know that we could probably put this on because the pandemic was kind of maybe been under control. But I believe there's one person that has probably held us very all together and has been a constant over this whole period. And I'll leave that to Tori.
There's always one person who's not in the photos opening the conference, but has done the millions and millions of seemingly unimportant jobs to actually give us all the experience that we've had, and I think it's been a positive one over the past 2 days. And ours is Amy Hardwick. Thanks, Amy, you've done amazing.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
So Amy's also on a PhD journey looking at coach learning, Special Olympics, and taking a global perspective on that. So there's going to be lots more to come from Amy as well. So without further ado, we'll close the conference there.